the time for playing is over. It's been over, but it's really over.
How will China launch its invasion of Taiwan if it opts for war? How will it deploy its air power, its troops, its missiles, and also its naval bases? Establishing air superiority over Taiwan is not going to be an easy task. So instead of relying on its fighter jets, China will try and use its missiles to try and systematically dismantle Taiwan's ability to strike back. For this, China has built up an array of military bases. According to open source intelligence data, this is how the Chinese missile bases have been spread out across the country. There are an estimated 109 missile bases, and a majority of them are along China's east coast. China has also packed its eastern coast with an estimated 46 naval bases and other naval assets. And it is from these air bases that China will fly its fighter jets in case of an attack on Taiwan. But how likely is it that China will invade into Taiwan? President Xi Jinping has minced no words. He has repeatedly stated his ambition is to reunite Taiwan with mainland China.
Having said that, this plan, this decision, this declaration does reflect a change in Europe, a sort of late realization about China. For years, Europe was oblivious to this threat. They talked about competing with China, they talked about engaging with China, but they never talked about conflict. Could that sentiment be changing now? Let's hit the rewind button. The date is December 2020. China and the European Union concluded a very important deal, a comprehensive agreement on investment. The EU was upbeat about it. They called it China's biggest ever agreement with another country. The biggest ever. This deal was supposed to chart the future of China-Europe ties, a partnership based purely on money. 2 years later, what's the status? Zero progress. In fact, things have become worse. The European Parliament is yet to ratify this investment deal, plus China is picking fights with multiple EU states, with Lithuania on Taiwan, with France and Germany over the South China Sea, and now over the Ukraine war. So where exactly did things go wrong? We'll come to that in a bit, but first let me tell you what is at stake. What was China hoping for from Europe? Broadly speaking, two things. Number one, a consistent and lucrative market. China is Europe's biggest trading partner, even bigger than the United States. Their total bilateral trade is worth around $700 billion. China wanted to keep that market open. Number two, a counterweight to US hegemony. For a long time, Europe was talking about strategic autonomy, possibly decoupling from Washington. If that happens, China stands to benefit. It could deny the US crucial influence in Europe. And this is classic Chinese strategy, making your enemies fight amongst each other.
2022 will be a critical year in the history of the world. In a few days, China, the most powerful authoritarian state, will be hosting the Winter Olympics. And like Germany in 1936, it will attempt to use the spectacle to score a propaganda victory for its system of strict controls. The victory of open societies can't be taken for granted in a world teetering at the edge of military aggression, both in Ukraine and in Taiwan. President Biden has generally adopted the right policies. He told Putin that Russia will pay a heavy price if he attacks Ukraine, but the US will not go to war to defend Ukraine. If Putin attacks, the heaviest penalty will be greater transatlantic cooperation. Biden won't make any unilateral concessions, but he's interested in finding a peaceful solution. The choice is up to Putin. That has had disastrous consequences. In contrast to Deng Xiaoping, Xi Jinping is a true believer in communism, Mao Zedong and Vladimir Lenin are his idols. At the celebration of the 100th anniversary of the CCP, he was dressed like Mao, while the rest of the audience was wearing business suits. But he rules by intimidation, and nobody dares to tell him what he doesn't want to hear. As a result, it's difficult to shake his beliefs, even as the gap between his beliefs and reality have grown ever wider. China is facing an economic crisis centered on the real estate market, which has been the main engine of growth ever since Xi Jinping came to power in 2013.
In the month of June so far, the Chinese fighter jets have invaded Taiwan's air defense identification zone a total of 12 times. And in the last 10 days, there's been panic in Taiwan's skies a total of 8 times. These sorties by the Chinese warplanes happened without any provocation, with no pattern to their predictability. And these are not minor incursions either. For instance, on the 23rd of June, there were 22 Chinese warplanes that flew into Taiwan's air defense identification zone. On the 22nd of June, there were 6 Chinese warplanes that tested Taiwan's air defense preparedness. On the 21st of June, there were a total of 29 Chinese warplanes that flew through Taiwan's air defense identification zone. While on the 19th of June, 10 Chinese warplanes popped up on Taiwan's radars. There's a clear pattern to what is unfolding over the Taiwan Strait, an unmistakable case of intimidation and bullying by Beijing in a bid to cow down Taipei.
The model on which the real estate boom is based is unsustainable. People buying apartments have to start paying for them even before they are built. So the system is based on credit. Local governments derive the bulk of their revenues from selling land at ever-rising prices. Eventually, prices had to rise beyond the level ordinary people could afford. That happened in the middle of 2021. By then, the boom had grown to an unhealthy size. It accounted for nearly 30% of the economy, and it was eating up an ever-increasing amount of credit. After accelerating gradually, the property boom ended with a bang. Residential land prices in June 2021 were more than 30% higher than they had been the year before. The authorities tried to slow down the pace and ordered banks not to increase lending for residential real estate. The directive had the opposite effect from what was intended. It made it difficult for the largest and most leveraged developer, Evergrande, to meet its obligations. Subcontractors who didn't get paid stopped working, and people who had bought apartments started to worry that they may never receive the homes they were paying for. When the main selling season started in September, there were many more sellers than buyers. For a while, there were hardly any transactions at the advertised prices. But today, prices for both land and apartments are starting to fall. This will turn many of those who invested the bulk of their savings in real estate against Xi Jinping. Evergrande is now in receivership, and many other developers are facing the same fate. The creditors of Evergrande started fighting to improve their position in receiving bankruptcy distributions. The courts took charge, and their first move was to protect the subcontractors, who employ some 70 million migrant workers. It remains to be seen how the authorities will handle the crisis. They may have postponed dealing with it for too long because people's confidence has now been shaken. Xi Jinping has many tools available to re-establish confidence. The question is whether he will use them properly. In my opinion, the second quarter of 2022 will show whether he has succeeded. The current situation doesn't look promising for Xi. Closely related to real estate, China also has a serious demographic problem. The birth rate is much lower than the published figures indicate. Experts calculate that the actual population is about 130 million lower than the official figure of 1.4 billion. This is not widely known, but it will aggravate the real estate crisis, produce labor shortages, fiscal strain, and a slowdown in the economy.
While the world's attention is riveted on the war in Ukraine, China is turning the screw on its renegade province. Sending warplanes into another country's air defense identification zone is not tantamount to open hostilities, but it is a grey zone tactic that China has increasingly employed since December 2020 to keep Taiwan on the edge and to wear down its defense preparedness. In the last 1 year, Joe Biden has on 3 different occasions committed to defending Taiwan militarily. But each time, the White House has walked back on his commitment.
Are you willing to get involved militarily to defend Taiwan if it comes to that?
Yes.
You are.
That's the commitment we made.
Military analysts in the region say that for Taiwan to stand any chance against China, the United States must intervene. But the question, of course, is, has the United States got an appetite for an open confrontation with China?
Xi Jinping has also encountered serious problems with vaccines. The Chinese vaccines were designed to deal with the Wuhan variant, but the world is now struggling with other variants, first Delta and now Omicron. Xi Jinping couldn't possibly admit this while he is waiting to be appointed for a 3rd term. He is hiding it from the Chinese people as a guilty secret. All Xi Jinping can do now is to impose a zero COVID policy. This involves severe lockdowns at the slightest sign of an outbreak, but this is having negative effect on economic activity, and it is also inflicting severe hardship on the people who instantaneously quarantined wherever they are, and their complaints can't be silenced. Omicron threatens to be Xi Jinping's undoing. It is much more infectious than any previous variant, although it's much less harmful to those who have been properly vaccinated. But Chinese people have only been vaccinated against the Wuhan variant, and Xi Jinping's guilty secret is bound to be revealed either during the Winter Olympics or soon thereafter. Omicron entered China mainly through the port city of Tianjin, which is 30 minutes by high-speed rail to Beijing. By now, it has spread to an increasing number of cities across China and is no longer under control. Since the Winter Olympics is Xi Jinping's prestige project, the administration is going to incredible lengths to make it a success. The competitors are hermetically sealed off from the local population, but it does make sense to continue this effort after the event. Citywide lockdowns are unlikely to work against a variant as infectious as Omicron. This is evident in Hong Kong, where the Omicron outbreak looks increasingly serious. Yet, the cost of zero COVID is rising every day, and the city is isolated from the rest of the world and even from China. Hong Kong highlights the wider challenge Omicron represents for Xi Jinping. Xi tried to impose total control, but he failed. Given the strong opposition within the CCP, Xi Jinping's carefully choreographed elevation to the level of Mao Zedong and Deng Xiaoping may never occur. It is to be hoped that Xi Jinping may be replaced by someone less repressive at home and more peaceful abroad. This would remove the greatest threat that open societies face today, and they should do everything within their power to encourage China to move in the desired direction. Thank you.
China's intent to invade and capture Taiwan is in little doubt. But at what moment will the Chinese dragon feel bold enough to fire its first missiles across the Taiwan Strait is what the world should watch out for.
Now, why anyone in their right mind would think it's a good idea?
A bigger question, isn't there? Are we really right that we say we're reducing Russia to a pariah?
The entire world is losing its mind.
To start, you're completely missing the point, and everything you think is actually at odds with reality when you look at the data.
And boy has it ruffled some feathers to dive into a complex societal issue.